Welcome to UFO Enigma. I'm Ron Rickey, your host, and we're going to delve again. Last week we started a two-parter on the Bermuda Triangle. We got up as far last week. I gave a rough description of the various 12 mystery zones around the world, as written by Ivan Sanderson in Saga. Now we're concentrating on the Bermuda Triangle, which would be right off of Florida. And before we get to the Flight 19 story, a lot of people don't realize that a couple months before the Flight 19, which took place in December, there was another mystery patrol that took off in the summer of '45, but these weren't torpedo planes, they were dive bombers. It was out of Cecil Field in Jacksonville, and this one particular flight, I don't know if they were flying back then TBDs and SBD two Helldivers. These were by no means, it was a training base, but these were experienced pilots piloting these aircrafts. The flight included 12 airplanes, 24 men. It was just a routine bombing mission. They were going to hone up on their skills, new techniques in dropping bombs on ships and whatever. The planes were all equipped with life rafts. Each man had a life preserver. There was directional equipment on it. Each plane had two men, a pilot, and a bombardier. The two of the planes were flown by actual instructors. 10 of the planes were flown by students, and the flight was supposed to take off. It would be a 2-hour flight, about 100-mile radius, and they would drop their bombs, come back, and it was no big deal. And just a normal day in the Florida sun flying around. After the flight did take off, supposedly now these planes were supposed to pair off or separate, so there wasn't there wasn't contact by everybody on everybody else. The only thing was they would be alone in the sky with maybe just one more airplane. Well, during the 2 hours, no one gave it any attention whatsoever because there was no radio contact. Come time to land the plane, 10 planes landed, and the search by the Navy was inaugurated immediately. It was just get the planes out there. Never found a trace of those two dive bombers. Whether they went down over the water, no one will ever know. They were bombing in the water, so it was just a little preview of what was about to happen about 4 or 5 months later. It's an interesting fact that I think it was Robert Stack's show, Unsolved Mysteries. A lot of theorists claim that the pilots on this Flight 19 simply got lost. During the takeoff part of the flight, very, very heavy fog was covering in a cloud cover most of the east coast of Florida, so it was just one of these murky days and probably very easy to get lost. But I'm of the opinion these men knew what they were doing. Some of these men were veterans. They had been over fighting, and they were there, keeping sharp. And they claimed that when Taylor radioed that he couldn't see the coastline of Florida, which they said he could have seen it. That in actuality, he had actually turned his flight around, and he was more or less looking out over the open Atlantic. And of course, you wouldn't really see anything out there. But that strikes me as being a little bit far-fetched. I think myself, something happened that no one knows what happened. Now, Flight 19 was 12/5/45, right in December. Now, this included a flight of 5 of these Grumman TBM Avenger torpedo planes. State of the art at the time. They were none better. They were huge, one of the biggest fighting single-engine ships of World War II. Very, very reliable. They could fly 300 miles an hour. They could carry a torpedo. It was one of the few that actually carried the torpedo in the belly of the plane. Very modern for the day. And to show the reliability of the airplane, I personally have seen Avengers flying at air shows today. I mean, these planes were built 50 years ago, and they're still soldiering on. So I don't think you can blame. I can see blaming failure, mechanical failure, on one aircraft, but not when you have 5, and each 5 of them were within sight of each other. There's something strange there. The reason for the 14-man crew on the 5 ships was one man decided not to go. He claimed that he had enough flight time and he didn't have to fly, so he wasn't going to fly. He canceled on the day of the flight. His name was Corporal Cosnar. He didn't make the flight. So the lead ship, which was flown by Lieutenant Taylor, this is probably how they would fly him, right in this way here, the lead ship, and then echeloned all the way back. That was FT-28. Now, some of the other pilots were, Taylor was the leader, then they had a Captain Charles Powers, he was in FT-36, an Ensign Joe Bossy, who was in FT-3, and a Lieutenant Robert Cox was in 74. Now, the flight was like the one up in Jacksonville, supposed to have been just a routine flight. It was supposed to last a couple hours. They were supposed to take off at 2 and return approximately 4 in the afternoon. They took off from Fort Lauderdale Naval Air Station. The flight plan was, I don't know if you can really key in, this is kind of a small map. You were supposed to take off from Lauderdale, fly 160 miles due east, and then make a turn north for about 40 miles or so, and then do their run, and then come back to Lauderdale. They had enough fuel on board for about 1,000 miles of flight. Now, saying that they were actually flying at 300 miles an hour, which would be a little over 3 hours time, they did have enough fuel to get lost. If some of the theorists are right, they'd had enough fuel on board if they were going to go and did get lost here with just 160 miles under their belts. They still had plenty. They could have gone 800 miles out into the Atlantic, which would account for the fact that no trace would ever be found because they just simply weren't looking that far out. But then again, to me, it's as they radioed back during the flight, they weren't exactly over all ocean. They were reporting broken spits of land, which a lot of people thought maybe the Bahamas. That's why they were flying the wrong way, whereas they thought they were flying back towards Florida. They were actually going the other way. I can't buy that, though. As time went on, no one really gave any thought to the flight. It was just another flight going out, and they would be back at 4 o'clock. Then it seems funny that exactly at 4 o'clock, not before 4 o'clock, just about 4 o'clock, Lauderdale Naval Base did receive their first distress call, the first of quite a few. Lieutenant Taylor reported that they didn't know where they were. The sky was funny. The water was different. They couldn't tell a horizon line. There was land, but it didn't look right. They were in like a vapory type atmosphere. They flew that way for a while, giving distress calls, and they were in contact. The base radio was able to contact them, but they don't know if they were actually receiving the message, like the base was receiving their message. Well, as the thing was going, it was getting pretty hairy. Now, if they did cut their speed back to about 150 miles an hour, that would give them a lot more flying time than if they were going doing their full 300 mile an hour, which would certainly eat up the fuel a lot faster. They cut back, and they could stay up longer. But the last reports faded out around between 6 or 7 o'clock. It was nighttime by that particular time, and now these people had already had about 5 hours of flight in, 5 or 6 hours, and you think even if they were flying in circles, that someone would have picked them up in that area. I mean, there's a lot of traffic in that area. And here you have a radio contact. Could this be like, a direct line right to the unknown? I mean, here these men were just about to be swallowed up, yet they're reporting. It's almost like an eyewitness report of what's happening. Taylor, as I understand it, gave it up. He turned over to the command to the next ship, I think was Powers, I'm pretty sure, took it over, and he could do no better. And at the time, there was another ship in the air. The T-32 was on a training mission, and that was flown by Lieutenant Gerald Bermuda. He was in a fighter plane. Now, he had radio contact for quite a while with the men on Flight 19. He didn't have them in visual, and he was trying to keep them on the radio long enough to hone in on them so he could, lead them out. It never happened. Well, the final reports, distress reports, did come out around, like I said, about 6 to 7 o'clock. And I guess things were getting very, very hectic at the base, and the base commander had already been notified, and they said, well, it's time, we better send someone out. All right, they started by an air search, and the step one would be to send out a rescue airplane like this Martin Mariner right here. Very, very big ship. She had a crew of 13, fully provisioned, all the electronics state of the art for the time. I mean, she would not get lost. This plane would not get lost. She was meant to go out and find lost articles. The plane took off, and within 5 minutes, never, ever was seen again. Now, this is the sixth airplane plus 13 more men. Well, needless to say, fur was starting to fly. Their fuel, by the time that ship was up, they figured the fuel was out on the Avenger ships, which leads me to believe too, but we're talking about another type of a time zone here. Suppose those planes now were able to fly not using all that gas. Suppose the gas consumption was 100 times now. Suppose they had 7,000 or 70,000 hours of flying time. You're in a time warp of a sort where none of this physics of this world work. Everything is different. Suppose they were still up there and are still up there. That's been pondered too by a lot of experts. The last message was around 7 o'clock. Nothing ever was found. You think, okay, what if the Avengers did fly out into the ocean where they weren't searching? Okay, well enough. But what about the Mariner? See, that's the odd angle in this little mystery. 5 minutes out, she couldn't have reached any more than probably 150 miles an hour. So that plane probably only went out maybe 25 miles before it disappeared. A big plane like that, there should have been something. I mean, this plane had floats, pontoons, all life rafts inside of it, buoys, jackets. They found nothing at all. And this was within very, very close range of the airbase itself. I just can't buy the guys, not 5 pilots. You know, I can't buy 5 pilots just losing it like that. Okay, now these were the TBMs. Now, in his book, The Bermuda Triangle Mystery Solved, Lawrence Cush, he got quite a few interviews. He got, well, testimony in the book from various pilots at the time. And there was a Lieutenant Cox, who was a flight instructor. He was flying around the field at the approximate time of the first distress call, maybe about 20 minutes before. And I'll quote from this. It says, "I heard some planes or boats. One man was transmitting on a 4805. That was probably a frequency or a channel used by training flights. That is the word he used, and he didn't give any recognition. The party calling asked Powers what his compass reading and number of times, and finally said, 'I don't know where we are. We must have got lost on that last turn.'" So that's why a lot of people, researchers, claim that they were making a turn in the fog, and they really couldn't. They got lost. But as he goes on, he says, "I also called. This is This is FT-74, plane or boat calling Powers. Please identify yourself so someone can help you." He received no answer. So, I mean, here is someone that actually survived this. He was nowhere near the planes. He was in radio contact. He was getting no answer at all. And various men on the base did testify. Commander Richard Baxter, he was the assistant operations officer, a district Coast Guard officer in Miami. Now, this would be a few miles south of Lauderdale base itself. And he claimed that at 4:26, Taylor called in and said, "I am at angles 3.5 latitude, 3,500 feet, and have an emergency IFF. Does anyone in the area have radar screen that can pick us up?" At 4:26, a place called Port Everglades radioed to Taylor to stand by. At 4:28, Port Everglades to Taylor, "Suggest you have another plane in your flight with a good compass take over and guide you back to the mainland." So evidently they were picking up this whole conversation from Lauderdale down to Miami. It seems funny they couldn't have got a triangulation fix on them when they were doing this. Taylor, to me, it seemed like he was totally he was totally lost, and I'm pretty sure it was his plane that only had the shot man crew, so he only had one man in the ship, which might, one less man to give an opinion, or might make him panic or something. We might get lost and no one's around. At 4:31 now, this is they're about half hour overdue. Taylor calls Port Everglades, and he said that one of the planes in the flight thinks if he went 270 degrees west, he would hit land. All right, so if you are flying west, you should hit land. But according to the Get Lost theorist, he was already turned around so that when he did his 270, he would be flying east. You can take it from there. At 4:39, Everglades called to Fort Lauderdale on the phone, and saying that Cox, who was in the plane aloft, had run out of communications with the plane. So he thought that the flight was proceeding south and it was getting out of range of the man flying around Lauderdale, so he was getting out of air-to-air range with him, so that's why he lost the contact with him. At 4:45 now, Everglades station, I guess, had the best bearing on this radio contact. They called to one of the Keys and said, asked if they were able to get a fix on T-28, which presumably was still the lead ship. And the Key, Dinner Key reported back negative. They had nothing, and they continued to send on 4805 frequency, and we're picking up nothing at all. So at 4:45, which was approximately 45 minutes after when they were due, they were pretty much out of contact with the Coast Guard station. Now, another testimony of Lieutenant Commander Donald Poole, he was a flight officer at the Lauderdale base, had him in contact with Taylor's aircraft at this time. So he was out of contact with the Keys, which is very much south, and Poole claimed he was in contact, which would put them flying, in my estimation, flying back north. So actually they wouldn't be flying out over the open ocean anyway. He claims that at 4:45, when the Coast Guard station lost contact, he had him, and at 4:47, they figured they were in the area, so they were going to send up a search party. At 4:47, the Gulf Sea Frontier and Eastern Frontier HF-DF nets were alerted to obtain all possible bearings on transmissions from FT-28, which was transmitting on that particular cycle, 4805. They said the opinion was that it was unsatisfactory radio communication on 4805 kilocycles was due to interference from Cuban broadcasting stations. And I don't know, this was how many years before Fidel Castro, and they're already starting to get it in the act down there. whether they, it was probably just a commercial station jamming in. But as the, it's just, radio range in those days, they didn't have the real range like we have today. They had short wave and stuff, but you're talking, I think you were more or less out of range of any contact with the land from maybe 100 miles out. Even if they were 100 miles out, I really can't, I can't see them getting that lost. There should have been something. Granted, there was a fog, there was a very low cloud cover, but according to Poole, said approximately at 5 o'clock now, this was at about an hour after they're due, I heard two different students identified as plane or a person making the following statements. If we could just fly west, we would get home. The other transmission that was heard was, damn it, if we just fly west, we could get home. So these men were desperately trying to find west. I'd sort of leave it up to the viewer as what you think. Do you think they got lost? It seems to me they had enough radio communication there to actually triangulate the position of these men. I mean, they couldn't have been traveling. When they found out they were lost, I don't think they were going headlong a full 300 miles an hour trying to get home. I think they were just loafing around, maybe doing 150 miles an hour and maybe doing some circles, trying to get picked up on a radar station. Who knows? It's certainly a mystery. This TBM they found off of Florida last year. They got it up, but they got a portion of it up. It was so totally disintegrated and rotted from the water. They picked up part of the cowling, I think. They could get no numbers. Of course, after all those years, any painted numbers would be long gone. The corrosive action of the water would just, erase paint. It would be right down to the bare aluminum skin. It was interesting, though. It was one TBM, and it sort of fell into the they got lost faction, but without numbers, it's hard to tell. The men in the flight themselves calculated that they were up this way. All right, that would put them about 250, 300 miles northwest of the station. If they did get lost up in that area, that would be another whole situation. But from what I understand, when they finally did, after the Mariner went out and got lost, they never had such a huge search party. I mean, there was thousands of airplanes, thousands of men, hundreds of ships were out there, little boats. They were asking everybody to look for them. They not only covered the immediate area of Lauderdale, they said they'll spread right up to Jacksonville, up into Georgia, down further past Cuba, and they never came up with a trace. And a lot of people claim, well, what if they did actually fly over those spits of land were the Keys,